This is the third installment of my speed dating my bookshelf, and so the first one on my shelf is Kent Monkman, Life and Work, one of my favorite artists. I don't know a lot about him, but I have seen a few movies and I've seen some of his work, and I really love how he's taken many colonial paintings and he tells the story from an Indigenous point of view. So looking at the cover page, there is a picture of when the nuns and the priests and the RCMP went to Indigenous homes to take away the children. The violence of that is captured, you know, the pain and people trying to keep their children. The anguish is captured in his paintings. And so this is you could look at this and just discuss that point of view when looking at residential schools. Kent Monkman is a two-spirit artist and also a very brilliant artist. No artist in Canada has made more of an impact in understanding the events of the early 21st century than Kent Monkman. So revisiting scenes and iconic moments, he paints a picture that shows a lot of emotion and shows the violence of the police and the armed people and Indigenous folks. He's also a very handsome person. One of my favorites is, there are a few, I just had to revisit this because there's one that was very violent. I don't know if I can share it on YouTube, but this is on the cover of one of the books that I just got yesterday, which I will probably share here, and it's about Finding Annie. I forget the title of it. My favorite painting is called The Daddies. Well, I shouldn't say my favorite. This one here is a painting of Tom Thompson, and he has reimagined it over here. I won't show the whole painting, but it says he appropriates the iconic work of the Jack Pine 1916-17 by Tom Thompson by subverting the original painting's visual language and meaning. In this watercolor, Monkman obscures the famed Canadian landscape with a scrim of violent racist text from a pulp western novel that he culled from his research on the fetishization of Indigenous men. The next book that I have is called The Fantastic Flying Books of Mr. Morris Lesmore. I remember purchasing this book from Indigo and loving it. I cried in the library when I read it, and I purchased this to read to students about, and it says it's an Academy Award-winning short film, which I have not seen, so I will have to look up. Everything in Morris Lesmore's life, including his own story, is scattered in the wind. Morris Lesmore loved words, he loved stories, he loved books. His life was a book of his own writing, one orderly page after another. He would open it every morning and write of his joys and sorrows and all that he knew and everything that he'd hoped for. But every story has its upsets. One day the sky darkened and the words blew and blew. Till everything Morris knew was scattered, even the words of his book. He didn't know what to do or which way to go, so he began to wander and wander. Then a happy bit of happenstance came his way. Rather than looking down, as had become his habit, Morris Lesmore looked up. Drifting through the sky above him, Morris saw a lovely lady. She was being pulled along by a festive squadron of flying books. Morris wondered if his book could fly, but it couldn't. It would only fall to the ground with a depressing thud. The flying lady knew Morris simply needed a good story, so she sent him her favorite. The book was an amiable fellow and urged Morris to follow him. The book led him to an extraordinary building where many books apparently nested. The library. And then on and on. He's got a friend. He's reading different books. And over the years, he continues to read. Beautiful, beautiful illustrations in this book. The books were sorry, but they understood. Morris put on his hat and took his cane. As he went out the door, he turned and smiled and waved goodbye. "I'll carry you all in here," he said, and pointed to his heart. And then you see that he flew away. The books were quiet for a while, then they noticed that Morris Lesmore had left something behind. It's his book, his oldest friend. Inside was Morris's story, all of his joys and sorrows, all that he knew and everything that he'd hoped for. Then the books heard a small expectant sound. There in the doorway was a little girl. She looked around with wonder. Then something fantastic happened. Morris Lesmore's book flew up to her and opened its pages. The girl began to read, and so our story ends as it began, with the opening of a book. I'm definitely going to have to watch this movie and see how it compares. I find the book wonderful. The next book on my bookshelf is Full of Life, Exploring Earth's Biodiversity. I love young adult fiction for learning about science. I find it not as academic and dense in language, so I wanted to read this book because I want to find out about all the different forms of life. I've taken an interest in this after reading one of my favorite books, which is Braiding Sweetgrass, and just looking at biodiversity in general. An indigenous point of view that is very different than the Western point of view is the sort of hierarchy or the tree, you know, with the with all of the different families in our ecosystem. In sort of indigenous point of view, it's more that we are all equal, more of a circular idea, and I want to read more about that. That is my desire for learning this year. True Fungi, all about it. On spotting a mushroom or toadstool on a forest floor, many people think they are looking at part of a plant, but a mushroom is more closely related to you than it is to a plant. The true fungi are nested inside the larger clade Amorphia, which also includes animals. The common ancestor of fungi and animals may have looked rather like the first fungi, single-celled creatures with a whip-like tail to help them move around in watery habitats. Fascinating, and I like the layout. I love the artwork in this book. Exploring Earth's Biodiversity. Okay, amongst the books on the third shelf is this one, Punching the Air. Ibi Zoboi and Yusuf Salam of the Exonerated Five. Okay, nothing short of masterwork of humanity, Jason Reynolds. Jason Reynolds is one of my favorite writers as well. Let's see. Amal Shahid has always been an artist and a poet, but even in his diverse art school, because of a biased system, he's seen as a disrupted and unmotivated. Then one fateful night, an altercation in a gentrifying neighborhood escalates into tragedy. Boys just being boys turns out to be true only when those boys are white. The story that I think will be my life starts today. Suddenly, at just 16 years old, Amal is convicted of a crime he didn't commit and sent to prison. Despair and rage almost sink him until he turns to the refuge of his words, his art. This never should have been his story, but can it change? With spellbinding lyricism, award-winning author Ibi Zoboi and prison reform activist Yusuf Salam tell a moving and deeply profound story about how one boy is able to maintain his humanity and fight for the truth in a system designed to strip him of both. Birth. Umi gave birth to me. At home, she has a video of every birthday. She makes me watch. When I was little, I would run away. Umi would laugh and say, "Come here, boy. You gotta remember where you came from." She'd chase me around that small apartment, and I'd cover my eyes pretending to be gagging. "That's nasty, Mama," I'd say. "That's life, Amal. You have to respect it," she'd say. Umi was in this inflatable pool in the middle of our living room with the midwife next to her. My father was holding the camera. She was taking deep fire breaths, eyes closed tight, not even screaming, almost praying. Then the midwife plunged both her hands into the pool, and then there I was, rising out of the water, squirming little brown thing, barely crying, big eyes wide, as if I'd already done this before, as if I'd already been here before. Umi says, I was born with an old, old soul. Old soul. So this is written like a poetry narrative. I've had this on my bookshelf for quite a while. Jasmine Morga, Other Words for Home. A Newbery Honor book, which is wonderful. Changing. It is almost summer, and everywhere smells like fish, except for right down by the sea, where if you hold your nose just right, you can smell the sprawling jasmine and the salt water instead. In the summer, I always hold my nose to avoid the stench of fish and tourists that smell like hairspray, and money, and French perfume. The tourists come from Damascus and Aleppo, sometimes even Beirut and Amman. Once I met a man all the way from Doha. I asked him about the big skyscrapers that I have heard reached all the way up to the heavens, but Baba hushed me quiet before the man could answer me. Baba does not like for me to talk to tourists. Strangers, men. He does not want me to talk to anyone that I do not know, or even people I do know. He always says, Jude Sketi. I think that's how you say it. And so I bite my tongue, and it sometimes tastes even worse than the way the summer fish smell. Everyone is saying that there will be fewer visitors from Aleppo this year, that there is no one left in Aleppo to come, that everyone who would ever leave Aleppo already has. When I ask Mama if this is true, she says, Jut, Sketi. Jude never thought that she'd be leaving behind her beloved older brother and father behind all the way across the ocean in Syria. But when things in her hometown starts becoming volatile, Jude and her mother are sent to live in Cincinnati with relatives. At first, everything in America seems too fast and too loud. The American movies and Jude has always loved haven't quite prepared her for starting school in the U.S. and for her new label of Middle Eastern as an identity she's never known before. But this life also brings unexpected surprises. There are new friends, a whole new family, a school musical that Jude might just try out for. Maybe America, too, is a place where Jude can be seen as she really is. This lyrical, life-affirming story about losing and finding home, and most important, finding yourself. Looks very good. Gachar Gochar. Vivek Shanbhag is an Indian Chekhov. A young man's close-knit family is nearly destitute when his uncle founds a successful spice company, changing their fortunes almost overnight. Vincent is a waiter at coffee house. It's called just that, coffee house. The name hasn't changed in 100 years, even if the business has. You can still get a good cup of coffee here, but it's now a bar and restaurant. No one of Not one of those low-lit bars with people crammed around tables where you come and suspect that drinking may not be such a wholesome activity after all. No, this place is airy, spacious, high-ceilinged. Drinking here makes you feel cultured and sophisticated. The walls are paneled in wood to shoulder height. Old photographs hang on the sturdy square pillars in the center of the room, showing you just how beautiful this city was a century ago. The photographs evoke a gentler, more leisurely time, and somehow Coffee House still manages to belong to that world. For instance, you can visit at 7 in the evening when it's busiest, order only a coffee, and occupy a table for 2 hours, and no one will object. They seem to know that someone who simply sits there for so long must have 1,000 wheels spinning in his head, and they know those spinning wheels will not let a person be. Eventually he'll be overwhelmed, just like the serene spaces in those photographs that buyers devoured and turned into cluttered mess we have around us today. But let all that be. I don't mean to be rude. Getting back to this Vincent, he's tall, dark fellow, a little over middle age, but strong without a hint of a belly. He wears a white uniform against which it's impossible not to notice an extravagant red cummerbund. On his head is a white turban, its tuft sticking out like Krishna's peacock feather. I can't help feeling, when Vincent is around, serving coffee, pouring beer at a practiced angle, betraying the faintest of smiles as a patron affectedly applies knife and fork to a cutlet, that he can take us all in with a single glance. By now, I suspect he knows the regulars at Coffee House better than they know themselves. Wonderful, wonderful sounding book. The next book is The Wisdom of Words, Essential Life Lessons for Positivity and Grace. I remember picking up this book because I loved the illustrations. And this book is about advice, I guess, or words to live by, and then a little bit about the bird. So, find your space to shine. Named after the island it once dominated, the Manx shearwater has its largest colony in the Isle of Man. But thanks to invasion of rats over 200 years ago, this was swiftly destroyed, meaning the bird had to travel further afield to establish itself and truly flourish. Now it nests along the Atlantic coasts in deeply crafted burrows, but spends most of its time out at sea. While it may appear ungainly on the land, its slender body lends itself to gliding, and this bird is able to fly at a speed over the surface of the waters, shearing a path through the waves. Find your space to shine. Let positivity be your light. Find joy in togetherness. The American Goldfinch, a symbol of hope, celebration, and rebirth. I love that each bird has a different statement. Keep your mind active. Celebrate your differences. Be bold in your endeavors. I think to myself, if I'm going to write a book and maybe feature some of these birds, it would have something to do with this type of symbolism, possibly. Or maybe just for myself. Don't worry if you're not someone's cup of tea. What we talk about when we talk about Anne Frank stories. It's a collection of short stories, and the first one is the title of the book. They're in our house maybe 10 minutes, and already Mark's lecturing us on the Israeli occupation. Mark and Lori live in Jerusalem, and people from there think that gives them the right. Mark is looking all stoic and nodding his head. If we had what you have down here in South Florida, he says, and trails off. Yep, he says, and he's nodding again. We'd have no troubles at all. You do have what we have, I tell him. All of it. Sun and palm trees, old Jews and oranges, and the worst drivers around. At this point, I say, we've probably got more Israelis than you. Debbie, my wife, she puts a hand on my arm. Her signal that I'm taking a tone or interrupting someone's story, sharing something private, or making inappropriate joke. That's my cue, and I'm surprised, considering how much I get it, that she ever lets go of my arm. Yes, you've got it all now, Mark says, even terrorists. I look to Lauren. She's the only one my wife has the relationship with, and the one who should take charge. But Lauren isn't going to give her husband any signal. She and Mark ran off to Israel 20 years ago and turned Hasidic, and neither of them will put a hand on the other in public. Not for this, not to put out a fire. I remember reading this and finding it really interesting. It went all over the place, and it's one of those books that has a lot of deep meaning and layers and a lot to discuss when you read it. I have to reread these stories and finish the book, actually. Margaret Laurence, Dance on Earth, a memoir. Margaret Laurence is one of my favorite writers. And it's a memoir. In writing career spanning nearly 3 decades, she became one of the most celebrated and widely read authors in the world. In this, her final work, Margaret Laurence reveals the story of her fascinating life and process of her writing and people and emotional journeys which accompanied it. Can't wait to read it. My favorite book of hers is The Diviners. I have heard it said that war is for men, that motherhood is for women. I find this appalling and essentially quite false. Calling Down the Sky. Rosanna Deerchild. Canadian Indigenous Voices. I think this is a very interesting drawing on the cover, and a little disturbing too. It evokes that. Mama's Testament, Truth and Reconciliation. People ask me all the time about residential schools, as if it is their business or something. Ever since that white guy, Nete in Ottawa, said he was sorry. As if he knows anything about those places. He wasn't there. He doesn't know. He wasn't there when I needed comfort, when I cried. He doesn't know that what the priest did, what those nuns did. You can't say sorry for those things, for what happened there. He's got no right. Share your story, he says. What does that even mean? Boy, these Mitzi Sioux and their fancy talk. Share your story, as if that's easy. Anyway, it was a long time ago. 50 years since those days. 50 years I said nothing. The words, they get caught right here in my throat, where the nuns would grab when we spoke Cree, as if grabbing a dead duck's neck hauls us up in front of that class. Stand there so long we pissed ourselves. You learn pretty quick to stay quiet after that. No, we never talk about it. Not back home, not with each other, not even when it was happening. You just tried to forget about it, leave it behind. Some of us did. Some of us are still trying. It always finds you, though, drags you back. Don't make up stories, that's what they told us kids. When we went back home, told them what was going on in those schools, still got sent back every year. Less of us came home. Still, they said nothing, until we were nothing, just empty skins, full of broken English, ruler, broken bones, Bible, broken spirits. And back home became a broken dream. No damage done for all but 5 years. That's what it said in the letter about my residential school story. While filming this, I was interrupted. My daughter brought our little foster puppy in. I think she cut her lip, but she's okay. Rosanna Deerchild is the award-winning Cree author and broadcaster. Her family is from Opipon na Piwin Cree Nation, located near South Indian Lake, Manitoba, but she grew up in Thompson, Manitoba. She worked for a variety of Indigenous newspapers and major networks for over 15 years, including APTN, CBC Radio, and Global. She is also co-founder of a member of the Indigenous Writers Collective of Manitoba. She currently lives in Winnipeg and works as the host of Unreserved on CBC Radio 1. I listened to that. This poetry collection is fierce, raw, and candid. It is also visceral. intricate, and above all, illuminating. By recounting her mother's residential school experience in a powerful poetic narrative, Dearchild expertly illustrates the heartbreaking trauma of that tragic saga and how it complicates relationships over generations. By beautifully and elaborately exploring those relationships and that devastating history, she finds and celebrates the resilient and hopeful spirit that many residential school survivors, like her mother, have managed to retain in the face of horror and torment. As a result of Calling Down the Sky is an essential read in understanding the true modern history of this land and in honoring people who survived it. Next book on my shelf is Astrophysics for Young People in a Hurry, Neil deGrasse Tyson. I have the adult version of this book, and when I saw the one made for children, I got it because like I mentioned before, when it comes to nonfiction text, I really like to look at things written for youth first, because it's much easier to read and quick to digest. And then I can get to the more dense version if I feel inspired to. Such a great scientist. I love him. I think he's one important person of our times. I really do. Astrophysicist, and he's black, but it's not about his blackness, it's about his knowledge. And I think that he is a wonderful hero for our time. Two more books. This one here is Three Wishes, Palestinian and Israeli Children Speak, Deborah Ellis. This book is 20 years old. The children and young people in this book share a very small piece of land on the Mediterranean Sea. This land, once called Palestine, is a land sacred to Jews, Muslims, and Christians, but the area has been at war for more than 50 years. The genocide that took place during World War II caused many Jews to believe that they could not count on governments in the world to protect them. The last book on my shelf is Speaking of Indigenous Politics, Conversations with Activists, Scholars, and Tribal Leaders. And this book is a recording of conversations. So let's go right to the first one. I want to ask if you could start off by telling more about your background and what led to the birth of the Wapanach Language Reclamation Project. Well, little Jessie Doe Baird. Well, my background, I am Mashpee Wapanag woman, born and raised in the community, and I think that really the language chose me rather than me choosing it. We have a prophecy around language, leaving our home and returning to our home, and I think that the work that we are doing right now, all of us together, is really the fulfillment of a part of that prophecy.